everyone. I'm Carrie Brown, Director of the Vermont Commission on Women, and I'm very pleased that you're joining us to talk about Latina Women's Equal Pay Day. So every year, the Vermont Commission on Women observes Equal Pay Day, which is a symbolic day that represents how far into one year women have to work to catch up with the money that men made from the year before. And it usually falls around the end of April, the beginning of March. And that's calculated by looking at all of the money that women earned in the previous year and all of the money that men earned in the previous year and seeing what the relationship is between them. And in this past year, women made about 84% nationwide and in Vermont as well of the money that men made. But that only tells a part of the story. When you look a little bit more closely, you start seeing big differences between different groups of women within that overall number. And so we are taking a closer look at the different equal pay days that fall throughout the year. And we're doing that through this series of conversations with women who can speak about different women's experiences. So today we have a wonderful conversation about Latina Women's Equal Pay Day. This day, this symbolic day, falls on October 21st in 2021. And this means that in order to make as much money as white non-Latino men made in 2020, Latina women have to work all the way until October 21st. Nationally, Latinas make 57% of the money that white men made in 2020. And so we're here today with a panel of members of our community here in Vermont, led by Lisa Senecal, who is one of our 3 co-chairs of the Vermont Commission on Women. And they will share some of their experiences and their perspectives and have what I know is going to be a really fascinating conversation. So Lisa, I will turn it over to you to let you introduce our guests, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us today. I want to go ahead and get right to introductions. First, Marita Canedo is the program coordinator for Migrant Justice, originally from La Paz, Bolivia, and she moved to the US in 2005 and has lived in Vermont since 2010. Our second guest today is Amanda Garces, Director of Policy, Education, and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. She's also a member of the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont and comes to Vermont via New Jersey, LA, and Arizona, where she worked in organizing around migrant rights, border issues, and against the proliferation of private prisons. Amanda immigrated from Colombia at age 16. And Drea Tremos is a transplant from Charleston, South Carolina. She began her career in the healing arts 10 years ago when she became a Reiki practitioner. She graduated from Body Soul Massage School in St. Albans and founded Soul Vibration Massage and Wellness. Welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Really wonderful to have all 3 of you here today. So Carrie started us off with a really staggering statistic that I know all 3 of you are very familiar with, or 2 of them, that Equal Pay Day for Latina women is on October 21st, so almost 11 months into the year, and 57% of the wages earned by non-Latino men is what Latina women end up earning annually, which is just a devastating number. So if each of you could talk a little bit about what in actual experience you see those statistics meaning for Latina women. And Drea, since you are on the screen, I will go ahead and ask you to start, please.
Okay, so I'm Cuban American. I was raised by Cuban grandparents who came over in the 50s. And I grew up with a background that was very upper middle class, I would say. my family were doctors and attorneys and that sort of thing. And I didn't quite take that path. I decided that I wanted to be a farm worker. I was a farm worker for a number of years. I was an illegal immigrant. I farmed illegally in other countries. And I experienced firsthand what it meant to be an immigrant and a farm worker and what that really looked like. I eventually came back to the US and I decided I loved farming. I continued farming for a number of years. And I ended up landing a job with at a farm in Jericho that was incredibly, it was an incredible experience because we were paid fair wages. And I was there with all sorts of different people, a lot of Guatemalans, people from all over the country, a lot of Vermonters, but it was a very different experience from my previous farming experience. But farming still didn't pay bills, so I decided to become a business owner. And I had done Reiki for many years, and I thought, oh, I love massage, I love helping people, I love caregiving. And prior to my farming life, I was a preschool teacher, and I taught Spanish and other farming, actually, like gardening. But I wanted to help other Latina women as well be able to step out of this wage gap. And I've discovered a profession where women do much better than men. I tend to make money faster than my male counterparts. They have to work a lot longer and a lot harder to get where I've been able to get to in 4 years with less effort. So it's been a very fascinating to be on both sides of that coin. And my goal now really with my business is to grow it so that I can hire Latinas, hire more women, and help them to get better training, especially if they want to be in the healing arts in whatever way that looks like for them. So.
Thank you. That is fascinating to be on both sides of that and to find a path to a career where you are not only earning fair wages, but you have an advantage over men, which not many women have the ability to say. Amanda, can you talk to us about how you see this tremendous wage gap impacting women in Vermont, Latina women in Vermont?
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to share kind of my the history of my family coming into the U.S. And I just came to Vermont in 2017. But my mom, came here. I came when I was 16, and she was take care of older people her life while she was here. So she used to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, for over 7 years straight. Whenever she needed to take a day off, she needed to find somebody that she needed to pay out of her pocket so that she could take a day off or go to the doctor's appointment. She never really had vacation. So when she finally brought me after 8 years that she had been here, that was kind of what I was reflecting on, thinking on Latina Equal Pay is just how much the exploitative system of people like my mom. My mom is now 83. She her Social Security, it's not that much, but so I think a lot of the work that I was doing in Los Angeles, working with domestic workers and day laborers, and just how much more work do we have to do. So when I look at these statistics, we see that Latinas make just 57 cents on average for every dollar that of the white male counterparts. And there's some other statistics that says that it's going to take us 200 years for us to equalize that pay. And so in Vermont, I think we need to do more. I think that Marita will talk a little bit about what is happening with our migrant farm workers and the woman who she works with. But there's an influx. There's a lot of domestic workers that are coming in that are Latinas. In Montpelier, I was thinking that the rate in some of these is $35 an hour, which is the informal rate for cleaning. However, that is independent contractors. So if people get sick, if they have children to take care of, daycare, all of that, it's like a package that it's unseen. So for I can only imagine how much more we have to do in this state. We have to think about not only the wages, but how we're taking care in terms of vacation, sick time, and all of the things that we need. So we need to do more. So it hasn't changed. I think for Vermont, we really need to take a look into our domestic work and thinking about how we're going to move this conversation forward.
Thank you very much. And Marita, Amanda just mentioned that you would talk with us more about migrant workers' experience. Can you give us a sense of what this wage disparity means in especially the migrant farming community?
Yeah, no, thank you for the space. I just want to share a little bit about also my story. Coming as an immigrant, we have to understand that when we use the word Latina, it's just a terminology that was invented here to put all the people that are Spanish speakers into one label, and not acknowledging that we have different cultures, different everything. And most of us that are immigrants, as my own experience, I came here with a visa that didn't allow me to work or to study, just to be here. And it was really difficult for me, having 2 kids at the moment, and my partner couldn't even put in their taxes that he was a head of household and had dependents because of how the immigration system works. So starting from there, giving more opportunities to men and not to women, just having us as housewives or caregivers without any acknowledgement. When I moved to Vermont and I started learning about the farm worker community, this was in 2010, migrant justice was just starting. And most of the workers, immigrant workers in the dairy industry were young men. So the average of women were 6%, 5 to 6%. And they weren't working at the farms because they didn't get the opportunity to work. Like, farmers will see them as a distraction or a complication for getting housing because they might need more privacy. And also as weak because they couldn't do the same work that men were doing at the farms. They couldn't be farm workers. So the few women that were here were either with their partners or brothers, as people preparing food at home or cleaning the house, but more isolated, way more isolated, that already the immigrants that were, men immigrants that were working, that were able to do more things, at least to go out of the house to work while women were staying there. So just seeing that the opportunities for women in farms is still not the best. We see an improvement with the years, and we see that because of the organizing and because the benefits and the things that we've been achieving as a community, more women are coming into the state to work in farms. More farms are accepting women, realizing that they can do the work, and they also sometimes actually more organized and less distracted. But without protections of sexual harassment or education around that, or even talking about that, it's some work that we as Migrant Justice has taken our own, starting talking to our members, to leaders, because we don't want anyone to be talking about human rights and at home being abusive. So it's something that we're really taking to our heart to talk about this. And talking about equal payment, we still see that women are not paid the same. And it takes a lot of time for women to first understand we have rights, we can ask for things, and then be able to have a voice where not only they have to fight with their bosses and employers about this, but also with the culture itself that brings women as not worth it to receive the same amount of money, even that besides doing the work at the farm, you have to do the work at home and take care of the kids. So it's really important to understand that there is a lot to do, as Amanda said, a lot of education that's needed around, a lot of systems that we need to create. Because as women are coming also from this migrant community, if they don't find jobs in farms, it's possible that they are going to be cleaning houses or working in hotels. And we see that disparity of opportunities and equal payment.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things in there that are so important. First, that term Latina is that catch-all that white Americans created to be able to lump all people of so many different cultures together. And so the number that we have in Vermont, our tiny minority community, becomes smaller when you then separate it down into Black Vermonters and Latina Vermonters and Asian American Vermonters. But then further within your community, there are all those differences. So how do you see those culturally playing out? Because there are those differences. And then if you can talk, you can each talk a little bit about, because you've each had experience with this issue. There's obviously a difference between being undocumented and being able to fight for your rights, and being a citizen or documented and being able to fight for your rights. So how much more difficult is that within your community, both the protections that laws offer and the ability to go out and advocate for your community?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, first, I think we all should be fighting for our rights, either documented or undocumented. And one thing that makes it's a big challenge is that when people come to this country, don't know, even if you have some kind of immigration status, you don't know your rights. There is no an education about like, you are able to do this or not to do that. It's more about you're here, be thankful. And I think it's really important that we as organization, you know, with the field organizers, we go to farms, we talk to women, we created a women's group. Even in our structure as Migrant Justice, we had to change many things for having everybody like earning the same. So not taking into account if you have been with the organization more years or you have more experience on this, like anybody that's going to work here is going to make the same amount, because we acknowledge the importance of every work that needs to be done to educate our communities. Now, fighting for your rights, being undocumented, it's like breaking the fear of being exposed and targeted. And we know by our own experience that our members and leaders have been surveillance, have been targeted and arrested for fighting for their rights. And we had to sue the, Department of Homeland Security, ICE, even the DMV that was sharing information with ICE. And that's, like settle a precedent for around the country that people that are advocating for their rights shouldn't be persecuted. However, it's not a certainty. And actually after that lawsuit, one thing that we have seen is that people are more proud to be wearing Migrant Justice hoodies or having their stickers on their cars because they feel like, oh, they are not going to mess up with us. They know that at least we have this education. So yeah, it's a challenge, but also it's getting together like documented and undocumented people together to understand that we have the same interests to change this system, to make and build and create things that are going to be really bringing equity.
Yeah, can I just add that there is, I think, not only their rights, but there is, we always said, even if you're undocumented, you have rights, and that is like the work that we have to do. The National Domestic Worker Alliance is an amazing organization that has been working with domestic workers for a long time. And they have done a lot of bills, of the Bill of Rights for domestic workers, and trying to get their rights. And that's what they do, kind of empowerment and work. And I wish they come here to Vermont to do some of that work here. But their bill, they have the National Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, which includes workplace overtime pay, paid sick time, workplace harassment and discrimination, which Vermont, has a really good law around that. But it kind of puts it all together, and they do emphasize, whether you're documented or not, that these rights are there. And I think that is what we have seen is organizations like Migrant Justice, like National Domestic Worker Alliance, is what we need to push workers, I think, to make this equal pay at one point the fair thing. And so, like, thinking about the Latinas in Vermont, Latinas in this country, is that we have African Latinas that also have their own set of discrimination things that happen. We have our LGBTQIA plus Latinas, we have Latinas with disabilities, all that, you know, have very different relationships with equal pay, access, transportation, all of the things. So when we think of Latina equal pay, we need to think about all the barriers that we need to break so that we can get there, not in 200 years, but now.
Right. Thank you, Drea. Kind of building on that, you had personal experience, both with being undocumented and now in your work. What do you feel personally the difference of your access and how you're able to use your voice has changed?
Well, I definitely have a different foundation that I've been built upon because I am a second generation. My grandparents are from Cuba. They helped raise me. I was with them a lot, but there's not the fear that I had when I lived abroad and was undocumented. There's always that underlying fear of, can I go to the doctor? Will they turn me in? Will I be able to go see whoever across the border? And there were definitely times that I was very afraid. And, but I think that I'm having a hard time articulating. I think I'm just soaking in all the things that everyone said. But I think one of the things that really resonated so far for me is also the isolation part of being undocumented, and just having that experience of being without community. And because whether I think you're Cuban or Guatemalan or Mexican, we have strong community. We often lean on multi-generation upbringings. We have more than just our parents and our households. You know, we have this support system. And the American lifestyle, the American way, the white American way of being in the world is not set up that way. It is set up nuclearly, and I've never much related to it personally, but it's a lot different because if you're a migrant to this country, you've lost a lot of your community, and you either have to find it and build it, or you're maybe entering a community that doesn't understand you, isn't really, like, because Latina is such a big, just a lump group, that culture may not be as in jive with their culture. It's very complicated. So I want to be a part of the solution towards helping Latina women move towards that equal pay much sooner as well. It's 200 years is not going to cut it. That's not a reasonable number. So
no, it's an incredibly unreasonable number. It's already unreasonable that we don't have pay equity now.
it is.
And so 10 years from now is too long for pay equity to get here.
Yes.
And which kind of moves me into my next question. I can't remember if it was Marita or Amanda who mentioned, I think, Amanda, it was you talking about your grandmother and Social Security and how we have a tendency to think about pay equity being important for current day living, that we have our bills each month that we need to be able to pay. But there is a long-term effect of earning 57% of what you should. So can you talk to us a little bit about the cumulative nature of what we end up seeing at the end of these, 24/7 work that so many women do?
Yeah, so it was my mom who now makes very little at 83 through her Social Security. because, you know, one of the reasons why she came, she was undocumented for a long time, even though many do pay into taxes, because that is the reality. They are getting paid checks. That money goes into a pot that is not their pot, especially if they're undocumented. So that money is there sitting in another fund that will never get to them until they become documented. Once people are documented, then they, you know, get to see that later. But again, because we're not only are we not getting the right wage, but there were domestic workers are underpaid. So low wage workers in general, doesn't have the domestic work, people that work in hotels or janitors. I was a janitor when I first came to the US. I was making $5.15 an hour, right? So I think there is this conversation around the whole package of immigration and how that relates to the low wage work, you know, Latinas in the country itself. So it's like and the implications for when they're older. So my mom's lucky that she has 6 kids that she was able to bring to the US. So there's 6 of us here all over the country that can support her in many other ways. But, you know, still, she doesn't have a lot that in comparison to other, you know, older women who are from here. So I think that's really important to just think about the immigration and the complexity around what happens when undocumented workers give their life to taking care of the elderly in this country. But then when they become elders, they don't have the same support systems because of the inequality that we have. So,
Marita, that kind of brings me to another question that I wanted to be able to ask. We talk a lot about, and obviously we're talking about equal pay today, but I want to make sure that we highlight the contributions that the Latina and Latino community make to Vermont and to the United States, because we don't function without an immigrant community. And we get so much that otherwise the work would not be done by someone else. My family comes from a dairy family, my dad, and that work is primarily done now by immigrants to Vermont. So can you talk to us about overall what the economic implications are of not having the migrant community, and what the contributions of the Latinas living in Vermont is?
Sure, and just adding a little bit about what Amanda was saying, we need to see as the equal payment, just maybe as a baseline. You know, money is not going to solve everything. That's something that, okay, people can feel financially secure, then they can do more other things, and they, you know, can have a quality of life. So I think that's really important. And, you know, the migrant community here in Vermont is sustaining the dairy industry. And if we make more research and understanding about the other agricultural work, you know, who is picking the apples, who is like bringing the maple, and all the things that we are very proud from Vermont is sustained by migrant workers. So I think one of the biggest things I see on the migrant women here in dairy and in general, is the strength, because we know the path that they had to go through to end up in Vermont. As I said, there is a huge immigration problem with the borders, with the criminalization of immigrants and all the militarization of borders. And these women have to be exposed to many, many abuses while they are crossing the border. And we know by statistics that many of them don't make it. So I think when they are here and they feel empowered to raise their voice and start talking about these things, we learn about their stories. And they are so strong. It's impressive. It's amazing the things that they had to go through, sometimes leaving kids behind. And we see that kind of separation of families. And at the same time, they are working 12, 15 hours every day, because we know the farming, it's work that's very heavy, and they are doing that. They are cooking and attending the house. And if there are other kids, also that too. They learn the language because who's going to help the kids in the school? You know, kids go to school, and that's something that we're looking into the future, that more women coming and more families establishing here. In 4 or 5 years, we're going to have like a lot of immigrant community in the schools. And we need to create that support for the families, you know, with access to language and everything. I'm also part of the Education Justice Coalition with Amanda, and we talk about these things, you know, like the equity in everything, not only the payment. But I think not only acknowledging that they are workers that haven't stopped during the pandemic, that they don't have the protections as other workers, also seeing them as people that are seeking for solutions. They are not only being there as the victims of immigration or racism. They're really thinking and analyzing how we can bring collective solutions. And I'm really, you know, like, it's for me an honor to be part of Migrant Justice and have this connection with the women there, because I see how this, you know, thinking through many ways, creating programs as Milk with Dignity, or creating systems where there is this connection, this women's group that support each other because one is suffering from depression, and they decide like, we're going to get together and once a week. So then you have something to look ahead every week and things like that. So I think there is a lot to learn from these women, and we have to first acknowledge that, yeah, they are here and they are really strong.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the pandemic and the amount of the professional carers who are Latina. And Drea, you fall into the category of people who help care for us and care for our health. Can you talk about what that experience is like, and what you know about the greater Latina community, and how the pandemic might have exacerbated things that were already so hard, that all of the state is dependent, that work we're dependent on having Latinas do?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is that mental health has really taken a hit during the pandemic. Less in-person contact has been really detrimental, from young kids to our elderly, to our elders. And I used to work more with people who had sports injuries and things like that. But what I've noticed since the pandemic is that people are very lonely. And I work a lot with just talking with people, just letting them speak on the table, which really, when we do massage, it's often a very quiet profession. I don't tend to talk very much, but since everything happened in 2020, it's like everybody just comes in spilling and needing that time. And I was the only person somebody saw for a year. They didn't see anyone else.
Tremendous amount for you to be taking on.
It was quite an intense experience, I have to say. And I recently hired a Latina woman to work with me, and she and I think we both felt that this experience, especially because we understand the importance of community. We understand, like, it's part of the fabric of our cultures. And she's from Central America originally, but it's still we have that similar ability to sort of build community around us. And I moved away from where I was rooted in the South with my family, because I couldn't find good work there. I didn't feel that it was somewhere that I could expand. And in Vermont, there's been a lot more opportunities than I would have had down there. But it's come with a cost. It's come with a mental cost. And I think there's a lot of Latinas across the country that are having to make those kinds of sacrifices in order to feed their children, or the stories that like Marita was talking about with women coming across the border. My sister-in-law did that. She's from Central America and her story is harrowing. And she's just such a strong individual. This Latinas just, you build from these experience a stronger sense of self, I think, and a stronger sense of going after what you want, because it's not an easy path at all. And I can only imagine, I don't get to be around as many Latina people here, or Latino people, or Hispanic, whatever. There's just not as many. That's
Right.
something that's about living in the South, the diversity of the culture. But yeah, I think in terms of health and wellness, it's been quite eye-opening to see how people have responded to that kind of like isolation, and that how important touch is. Like in Caucasian culture, European sort of culture, I don't see as much touching and holding and kissing. It's like, if I don't kiss my family, and when I see them, they think I'm mad at them. Like, no, I just didn't. So
I've just been in Vermont for too long.
But yeah, it's interesting that people, I think, who don't come from that kind of culture are really just realizing how important touch is and how vital it is to their actual physical health as well as their mental health, because the mind-body connection, it's
Right.
real. There's no getting away from it. So
Absolutely. I think many more of us have come to feel that acutely in the past year and a half. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I want to make sure I go around and give each of you an opportunity to share anything that you want to make sure people understand when they're thinking about equity for the Latina community and for women. I will start with you, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that we're just everywhere, right? Like that, even in Vermont, when people say, well, there's not that many Latinas, there's actually a lot of us here. You know, I remember the first month in Vermont, I was like looking for my crew, and I did. We had a party with over 60 Latinos. Montpelier alone has representation of over 10 Latin American countries. So there's a lot of us here doing all kinds of work. 2.2 million Hispanic healthcare workers nationwide. I think that's really important to say that during this pandemic, you know, we are in the healthcare industry. We are the healthcare aid workers. We are the domestic workers. We are the childcare providers. We are, you know, cooking. We are working in your restaurants, Paz girls. We're working the farms. And I think that we have to start thinking about how do we move these conversations around equal pay, not just from the top executives, but like from the bottom up, because that's who builds our economy. That's who's helping us grow. And so I think of my family. Every time like I have this conversation, I think of my family and how like what we have done here, but also can't forget where we come from. You know, and what we do. You know, my mom is here visiting, so she's really present in my heart right now because she's been with me for a few weeks now. And just I hear her stories, and their stories from 30 years ago are the stories that I hear from my friends now. So I think like I just want to keep that in our hearts. And when we do have these conversations, it's about people, not about numbers.
I'm so glad that you said that. We have a tendency in Vermont to talk about, well, we're 98 point something white, and this is such a small percentage, but the small percentage is a lot of people. And we need to make sure, as you were just saying, we are thinking about the people, and people aren't just groups inside percentages to be dismissed. These are Vermonters living among us who deserve the same rights and opportunities and treatment and protections that everyone else does, whether it's a small community or a large community. Marita.
Sure, and adding to that, the many that are not counted in those statistics as well as a lot of the undocumented population. We always say we're around 1,000 workers sustaining the dairy industry, that 80–90% of the workers in dairy are immigrants in Vermont. And yeah, let's not keep on numbers, but really thank you, Amanda, for bringing that of like, we're people and we are here. I think, there are so many things that can happen to connect to us, and we should be connected. I was going to say, to make this accessible to our communities, having this recording translated with subtitles in Spanish for our community, so they can also hear about what we're talking about. They can hear that, we care, not because I'm an organizer with Migrant Justice, but because you all are talking with us. So I think that's really important, language accessibility, acknowledging how many we are. And there are many things that are happening here in Vermont, like women that are getting together, having their own food co-op that they build on their own in Addison County. They have events. It's really amazing to support them, and everywhere. And also, keep understanding that Latina is just a word for many, many different cultures. We have, as Amanda said, we have Black Latinx, we have Asian Latinx, we have Indigenous Latinx, we have white Latinx, and just understanding also the different dynamics of power as well. So I just want to thank you and thank everybody, and encourage to have this translated or having subtitles so we can share it with our community. It will be amazing.
Thank you for raising that. That's really important. Andrea, do you have parting words for us?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm very, very grateful to have been part of this discussion. I want to say thank you to everyone. It makes me feel a little less hopeless, I think, to know that there is more going on in Vermont than even I knew about. And I'm excited because I'm like, oh, wow, all these things happening. I want to get more involved. So yeah, just thank you all so much. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, and thank all of you. Thank you so much on behalf of the Vermont Commission on Women. Thank you for taking time to talk with us today, for sharing stories, and for sharing the work that you're doing with us, and for doing that work. It is so important, and we really appreciate you being here and your time. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.